Hey folks, Rob with Two Guys in a Ride. Today, boy oh boy, do I have a treat for you. We're going to see several exhibits, but first let me tell you where we're at. We're at the Savoy Automobile Museum in beautiful Cartersville, Georgia, and with me I have Mary. Now tell me, one of the cool things about your museum is that if I come back in a month, it's not going to be the same? Not all of it?
Not all of it. We have 5 different galleries. One of them has just cars that the Savoy owns. Not our whole collection, just a small portion of it.
Okay.
The other 4 galleries are set up that one of those changes out every month.
Wow.
So you could come back, say, like every 3 months, and unless the Savoy gallery changes.
But you do change that occasionally. Those are cars you own, but you do still change those out.
A lot of times it's just one car, one or 2 cars, although last summer we took everything out and it was all convertibles with the tops down. And I'm hoping we'll do that again this summer.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
But I don't know if they're going to do that. But otherwise, you could come down, say, like every 3 months, and all of the rest of the building would be different.
So one location, but different every time you come back, practically. So, and folks, I really want you to check them out online and check out the rest of our videos. We're going to do a few of these, so make sure you watch those as well. So what do you say, Mary?
Let's do it.
Let's go for a ride.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, so now we're in the collection that is actually owned by the Savoy Museum. A lot of the other ones, again, of course, because they're rotating, they are owned by other museums or celebrities or you name it, car builders and stuff like that, from all across the country that they actually borrow from. But this is one in their collection, and Mary, tell us about this.
This is one of the newest ones that we acquired. We've had it less than a month. Of the 300 that were built that year, this is number 129. We know that because we've been able to verify it on the plate. Now, this is not a survivor. We do know that there are probably maybe the engine is not native to the car. There's a number of things here that we know are not original to the car. We believe that there's been some restoration work on it, so it is not a survivor.
Okay.
But the Corvette, so this was the car that almost wasn't. And so why was that? Well, this was Harley Earl's dream. He went to Sebring, he saw the sports car races. There wasn't a US manufacturer at the time that was putting something together. He came up with the idea of the 2-seater sports car. So why did it not work? Well, there's a couple things. First, this is 1953. Yes, guys have come home from the war, but people are building families at the time. Most guys came home from the war. You focused on having a family, getting a home. A 2-seater car is not very practical at that time because you need a family wagon.
Right.
The second thing, and poor John DeLorean, he should have been paying attention. This had a very undersized engine. So the car looks really nice, step on the gas, nah, it's not, there's no giddy up behind it.
Folks, real quick, I just got to say, don't you just love Mary? I mean, she knows her history about cars. She knows that Volvo and that Peugeot engine and the DeLorean in the 80s that John DeLorean put in his cars, that's what it was. It was a dog, and that's what it was here. It was a Chevrolet engine.
Well, in all fairness.
But it was a dog.
It was a dog. However, that car was supposed to have a special lightweight frame and body assembly that the body could go on.
Right.
He bought it. He bought the rights to it. They found they couldn't mass produce it. Colin Chapman had to come in and build the steel chassis, and that was the added weight that made the car the dog. But anyway, he should have learned from this. It was a dog. He also should have learned from this. This was supposed to come out at $2,000. It came out at $3,500. Yeah. Same thing with the DeLorean. Came out way more expensive than what it was supposed to.
I would imagine 53. I mean, that money at $3,500. Would be the difference of probably saying $30,000 to $70,000 now.
Probably.
So if you go in your dealership wanting to buy a $30,000 car and they're like, well, you can have this one for $70 all day long. Yeah, I mean, so it was that much of a sticker shock that it was just unobtainable now.
And if you wanted a Chevy convertible, you could buy a full-size Chevy convertible for $2,200. Yeah. So for $200 more, you had the family car. So they had that. This is fiberglass. The whole idea of a plastic car, very novel idea. It was not the first production car that was plastic. There were a couple other people that had them beforehand, maybe not as much of a production run. Right. Actually, Henry Ford built a plastic car in 1941. He was concerned about lack of metal during the war. He used soybeans. Allegedly, there is a famous picture of him with a hatchet, taking a hatchet to the car, and they can't destroy the car. However, after the war, for whatever the reason, it never caught on. But going back to the Corvette, they used to have an ad that said, you go to your Chevrolet dealers and you can pick up the keys to your Corvette. No, you couldn't. They made 300 of them. They sent out invitations to people who they thought would want to buy them. John Wayne bought one. Curtis LeMay bought one. Now, one thing about Curtis LeMay, he got into sports car racing, so wherever he was stationed, he set up races on his base because coming back from Europe, he really got into it. So he got one, but they only sold 180 of the 300 cars. So they quietly dispersed them among the executives because they didn't want to say that they didn't get sold. But a lot of people who liked Chevrolets, when they were told that they couldn't buy the car, it was a real turnoff. Now, they expected they were going to sell 10,000 of these cars a year.
Wow.
That didn't happen until 1960. It took them that long from 1953 to 1960 to hit that benchmark. So why did they keep the car going? Well, for one thing, Harley Earl was the head of design. He had a lot of clout. This was his baby, and so he had the pull. On top of it, Ford came out with the Thunderbird.
Oh, yeah.
And the Thunderbird was outselling this 23-1, and it was designed by Frank Hershey, who used to work for GM, but they fired him. So now you have your old designer who's built a car for your competitor that is eating your lunch.
Yes, it is.
You are not going to cry uncle.
Right.
You will keep it going.
Yep.
And fortunately for Chevy, they got a letter from a guy by the name of Zora Arkus Dunktoff, who was a race car driver and an engineer. He saw the car, he saw where it could really go, and fortunately they hired him.
Yeah.
And it was his ideas and his expertise that ultimately made the Corvette what it is today.
Wow.
But it almost didn't make it. By 1955, they were ready to pull the plug.
Is that
and
right?
It was just that last bit of push that kept it going because they were losing money on it. It just was not the hit that they thought it was going to be.
Well, you know, I saw an episode a few years ago when the original cast was still on Top Gear, and they said the early 60s, the marketing campaign with the space age and everything, they had this special lease deal that they extended through astronauts. At Cape Canaveral and around that area, because I mean, who wouldn't want to drive a car that your favorite astronaut was now driving? So all these astronauts who were in the space with NASA in the space race, all of a sudden were showing up everywhere in their Corvette.
In their Corvettes.
Special lease, I think for $1. They couldn't give it to them because then it was seen as a gift. And then they had to pay taxes.
Yep.
So it was a lease. So the local Chevy dealer was leasing. I'm sure GM or Chevrolet must have been backstopping him with cash.
Probably.
Because he was only making $1 per car.
But think of the publicity.
Well, that was just it. Who wouldn't want one of those cool little sports cars that now had the performance to go along with the look and the style?
Absolutely.
But now was driven by your favorite new hero, John Glenn, and gosh, I mean,
Wally Schirra.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, just.
And then you have
Buzz Aldrin.
And then you had the TV show Route 66.
There you go.
And you have the guys driving Route 66 in the Corvette.
Yep.
In retrospect, did it make any sense? No, they didn't have real jobs. How did they afford?
Maybe they got $1 lease. I don't know.
I don't know, but who cared? It was the cool car. Now,
they were selling, and it was great on the marketing side of Chevrolet and General Motors to do that, to put that product placement both in that show and with the astronauts because they knew it was aspirational now.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the Corvette was considered the halo car.
Oh, yeah.
And it was to get you into the showroom. They knew the average person was not going to buy this car, but you'd want to come in and see it.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all these other vehicles that, you can't afford the Corvette, but how about this or how about that?
I could imagine the poor child who goes in 62 or 63, my favorite, with a split window, and they go in with their dad and they're like, oh, we're going to go see the Corvette, and they walk out with a Biscayne.
Not the same. Now, one other thing to mention, all of the parts for the car, when this car was built, it was all in parts. If you've ever seen one before, it's assembled. all the pieces are all in parts because it's all done by fiberglass. So if you look, I mean, a lot of the old cars, especially if they haven't been restored, you're going to see there are real inconsistencies. Lines don't match up. Some of
Okay.
that comes from being hand done. Now, a lot of
Right.
times if this were to go out to be restored, all of that's probably going to get all done to where everything is consistent.
Better than
around.
original.
Better than original,
Right.
yes. Funny thing about the car, they built the prototype, they took it to their Motorama,
Yep.
and they weren't sure what they were going to do with it. By the second day that it was on display, they decided we're going to make it a production car because the public response, people liked it.
Okay.
Now, the thing was, people weren't exactly plunking out money right there if they
Right.
said put down the down
But the
payment.
design study
The
and the idea of it.
Was a hit.
Okay.
So what happened to that car? Because here we have the iconic car. It would have looked like this. So you would have thought, okay, GM Heritage Center must have that car somewhere. No. The car was parted out. The chassis became the 1954 Chevy Nomad.
Oh,
And the body was sent to the proving ground where they tested it. They put it on fire because they wanted to see flammability. So they've got a car in production. You don't even know how the fiberglass is going to react if it catches on fire.
Oh
you
my
test it later. So,
but those were the early 50s.
Those were the early 50s. I thought they surely.
Hey,
they
we had
must
just
have-
kicked the world's butt in World War II. We didn't care if it
We
burned
didn't.
up or we could figure out how to get out of a burning car.
We could do that, and we were supplying the world with everything because most of Europe had been destroyed.
Right.
So we were not only doing our own consumer goods, we were helping them rebound. We were flush with cash.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now-
and we were the only superpower at that time.
We were.
Yeah.
Now, so you figure by 1960 it catches on, but figure 1950, that's 15 years after the war.
Yeah.
Guys have come after the war. They are now established in their career. You've got the family. The kids are growing up.
Yep.
We are now really becoming a two-car family. So all of a sudden, having a two-seater is not so out of the realm of possibility.
Right, right.
Because you got the family car. Okay. You got the job, you got the funds, you can
Yep.
have the cool little two-seater. And you can have the split window,
Oh,
which
yes.
is my favorite.
Yeah, oh, it meets, yeah,
And
exactly.
that's one we don't have here in the collection.
Well, and see, again, then it went from concept, which we see here, to proof, to the marketing of the early 60s turned it into that aspirational car.
Yeah.
Because they were seeing what was going on out in society as well, that we were becoming everybody was moving out of the cities, out
Yeah,
to the suburbs,
out to the suburbs.
and now we call them the exurbs even.
Yeah.
I mean, we were driving way more. The Eisenhower interstate system came about.
Yeah, that came along.
So why wouldn't you want to go out, and you could afford it because you had your career
Yeah.
at Sears or IBM or
Wherever.
you name it,
Yeah.
that was going to be a lifelong career that
Yeah.
paid you well. You had your starter home, you had your family. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, Dad got to cruise to work in style.
Yeah.
Or
And
he
so-
he and the sweetheart could have a date night on the weekend, cruising along in their convertible.
So by the 60s, the market had changed. A lot of the demographics had changed. Of course, the car now, but with Zora behind it,
Yep.
engineering-wise had changed. It became a success. Now,
Oh,
the
yeah.
funny little thing is, sometimes I like to say, I think this is the 70th year? I think this is their 70th year, or last year was.
Right.
This is not the longest production car. Actually, the Mustang is, because in 1983 there was no Corvette.
Okay,
And that's-
folks, fight amongst yourself in the comments, but that is factual. They did not make a Corvette in
Corvette.
'83, so it cannot be the longest running American production
car.
nameplate.
And the problem was the engine. They were having problems. Of course, by then we have emissions, and in California, I believe it was the L4 engine was there. It could not pass California emissions, and it got delayed. And by the time they got the approval, it was so late into 1983. They just turned around and they made it the 84. So there is no 1983 Corvette. So unfortunately, the Mustang, not the Thunderbird, but the Mustang is ahead of the Corvette in terms of longevity for a continuous production run.
So all you novice folks out there that want to get a 70s, 80s Corvette just to have as a hobby car and to tool around in on the weekend, be wary of your Facebook marketplace if they're advertising in 83 because they don't exist.
They don't exist. All the fun stuff you find out when you get to research cars and talk to car experts and owners, you find out all the little backstories that goes on behind. And Some of it is, you know, you're really amazed at, like, as I say, the stupidity of the people that run the car companies, and you look at them like, what were you thinking? Obviously you weren't. But a lot of times they got wrapped up just as much as everybody else in the excitement of the automobile.
Well, and you just pan around this room here. What you can see is that you can see there was a direct change, I would say, in probably the mid 70s, in my mind, where things definitely went away, maybe early 70s even, or late 60s, where things definitely went away from the stylist hands to the bean counters hands.
Absolutely.
You had GM that was basically badge engineering everything in the 70s and 80s. A Cadillac was a Buick, was an Oldsmobile, was a Pontiac. And it went on and got even worse in the 80s. You had Lincoln as a Mercury, as a Ford, Ford as a Mercury, as a Lincoln. All these things. This is badge and engineering. So what I really appreciate is seeing, and this is one of the reasons I like the older cars that are prior to. Now, one, I'm looking at this Toronado, you can definitely say, well, that wasn't a bean counter, because that and the Eldorado were the only two like it at the time with the front wheel drive. And they were uniquely different still, even though they had the same underpinning and driveline and whatnot. But still, you can still see there's the designers there, not as much the bean counters, because that was such a novel idea with that front wheel drive for a big car like that. But what I like about museums like this is that you get to see when the designers and the dreamers still had a role in automobiles.
And the diversity and the beauty, where you knew the difference between a Chevy or a Ford or a Chrysler, it was distinct.
Yeah, try to pick out a midsize SUV from a Silhouette today and tell me what exactly brand that is. Good luck. I'm a car guy, and I have struggles. I have a car pulling up from behind me and in the daytime, and usually I can spot the badge, but when it becomes dusk at night and it's just enough where it obscures the badge, I used to be able to tell just by the headlight design. Now I can't tell if it's a BMW or a Hyundai. And that's no slight on either one of them. It's just that the design is no longer there. It's the bean counters, the accountants who are in charge now, and that's a loss because, again, folks, look at these magnificent cars. Oh my gosh. And look, I mean, you know, my favorite, Studebaker, right back here. Check out my history of Studebaker. That's a video. You can click the link above. And if you want to see the other videos that we filmed here at this fantastic museum, the Savoy, make sure you click on the link above as well. Mary, again, thank you so very much.
Very
and
welcome.
folks, you come to the Savoy. I've met a lot of people here. I have not had to have the conversations like I've had with Mary, but if you come for a tour, you're definitely going to want to ask for Mary. I promise you, you will not be disappointed in the depth.
If you check ahead of time, they can tell you when I'm on the schedule.
There you go. The depth of knowledge that she has. She is what Barry McGuire would call 100% car crazy, and she is a car guy. And you got to love that. So again, Mary, thank you. Thank you for the hospitality of having us here today at the Savoy. We certainly appreciate it. And folks, thanks for watching.